On a cold night in San Francisco, billionaire Daniel Cross returned home with a precious chess set for his son Ethan. But what he found wasn't his son's excitement, but a terrifying scene. Ethan, just 9 years old, was crying helplessly on the marble steps, unable to stand, while Vanessa, his wife, stood above him with a cold, cruel expression. Vanessa's harsh words were like daggers to Daniel's heart. In that moment, he vowed not to let his son suffer another day under her cruelty. Before we dive into the story, leave a comment below and let me know which city you are watching from. Let's get started. The city of San Francisco was dressed in winter's sharp clarity, the kind of cold that painted the glass towers with streaks of white mist and pulled the fog low across the bay. From the penthouse balcony of the Cross residence, the Bay Bridge glimmered like a silver spine against the dusk. Cars glittered below in endless streams of light, the pulse of a city that never stilled. But high above that restless hum, the Cross family lived in a palace of glass and stone, a fortress perched on wealth, yet hollowed by silence. Daniel Cross had spent the entire day forcing his mind through boardroom battles and billion-dollar negotiations, yet as he drove his Tesla up the private driveway, it wasn't business that clenched his chest. It was the small velvet box sitting in the passenger seat. Inside it lay a rare wooden chess set carved in Prague, each piece hand-polished until it gleamed like it carried a century of secrets. It wasn't just a gift. It was his peace offering, his attempt to mend something far more fragile than any contract. His son. His Ethan. Ethan Cross was only 9 years old, but he carried himself with a weight that bent his shoulders. Since the car accident 3 years ago, the one that stole his mother's life and left him with a limp, he had retreated into silence. He was too bright for his age, finding refuge in strategy games and books that were far older than him. Yet he moved with hesitation, as though every step was a reminder of what had been lost. At night, Daniel often heard the faint ticking of a pocket watch, Caroline's watch, that Ethan would clutch in the dark, listening as if time itself could bring her back. Daniel had remarried 6 months ago. Vanessa. The name was sharp and soft at once, like silk wrapped around a blade. She was 32, polished, beautiful, in a way that cameras loved. Once his assistant, she had seemed like a salve for his loneliness, a chance to rebuild warmth in a home that had grown too cold. In the eyes of his business associates, she was perfect, elegant at galas, poised in interviews, a loyal partner beside a man who built empires out of code and vision. But perfection is a mask, and masks can crack. Tonight, Daniel left the office earlier than usual. Not for Vanessa. For Ethan. It was the boy's birthday, though he had refused every party invitation, every cake, every distraction. He wanted nothing. He asked for nothing. And Daniel, haunted by guilt that he had been on a business call the night of Caroline's accident, wanted to give him something tangible, something that whispered, "I see you. I'm here now." He tightened his grip on the wheel as the Tesla curved up the hill, the velvet box catching the glow of the dashboard. The penthouse loomed above its windows, gleaming with warmth. Daniel's chest loosened. He imagined Ethan's surprise when he revealed the chess set, imagined the boy's gray eyes flickering just for a moment with joy. He parked, stepped out, adjusted the lapel of his charcoal coat, and took the box in his hand. His breath misted in the sharp air as he approached the iron gate. Then it happened. Before he even touched the keypad, a sound cut through the night. A cry. Sharp, panicked, too young to carry such desperation. Daniel froze, every nerve sparking. He pushed the gate open and stepped inside, his polished shoes hitting the stone pathway. The cry came again, breaking, pleading. "Mom, please, I can't get up." The world narrowed to that single voice. his son's voice. Daniel's stride broke into a run, the box slipping from his hand and tumbling into the shadows. He burst through the courtyard chest, pounding until the scene unfolded before him like a nightmare burned into daylight. On the marble steps, Ethan lay twisted, one leg awkward beneath him, his small hands clawing at the cold stone. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, his breath coming in ragged sobs. Beside him, the wheelchair lay tipped on its side, one wheel still spinning like a cruel clock. And above him, framed by the golden light spilling from the doorway, stood Vanessa. Her expression was a storm of disdain. No sweetness, no practiced smile, only the sharp, merciless twist of lips that had dropped all pretense, her eyes dark and glittering, drilled down at the boy. "Get up," she spat, her voice slicing through the winter air. "You useless thing. Do you plan on lying there forever? Do you think I'll spend my life taking care of a cripple Daniel's chest seized?" The air stilled. Ethan's sobs fractured into words, his small body trembling. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall. Please, don't! I can't." His voice trailed into a whisper. His hands clutched at something against his chest, the pocket watch. Caroline's. His talisman against despair. The chain dangled between his fingers as if even time was begging for mercy. Vanessa stepped closer, her heels clicking like nails against stone. She leaned down, her voice low, venom dripping. "You killed her, you know that. If you hadn't begged her to take you to that park that day, she would still be alive. You're nothing but a curse." Every word was a knife slicing open wounds that had never healed. Ethan's tears spilled harder, his head bowing as if crushed beneath invisible weight. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry." He whispered again and again, the apology of a child who thought guilt was carved into his bones. Daniel couldn't breathe. The bouquet of sound around him, the city, the wind, the faint hum of traffic collapsed into silence. The only rhythm was his heartbeat, pounding like war drums. The box with the chess set lay forgotten in the dark. But his son, his boy, was sprawled on the steps, begging forgiveness for a sin he never committed. Something inside Daniel snapped. Vanessa. His voice exploded thunder rolling across marble and glass. The name was not a call, but a command, a verdict. Vanessa's body jolted. For a fleeting second, shock crossed her face. Then, like a performer caught mid-scene, she shifted. Tears welled in her eyes with unnatural speed, her hand flying to her mouth. She gasped, voice breaking into a practiced sob. "Daniel, you don't understand. I only wanted him to try. He needs to be strong to learn to stand. I was helping him." Her words shook, woven with the tremble of someone who had rehearsed every note of pity. Daniel didn't move. He stood rooted, fists clenched, jaw tight, his eyes locked not on her but on the boy. Ethan still curled on the stone, still clutching that watch, still whispering apologies into the cold. The sight shattered him. He strode forward, ignoring Vanessa's sobs, and dropped to his knees beside his son. His arms swept around the frail body, lifting him with a gentleness that belied the fury searing his chest. Ethan's small frame pressed against him, shaking, burning with the heat of fear. Daniel's voice broke into a whisper, raw and jagged. "You are not to blame. Do you hear me? Not for this. Not for her. Never." Ethan's sobs quieted, but his lips still trembled against his father's collar. His small hand gripped the watch so tightly his knuckles paled. His gray eyes fluttered heavy with exhaustion, and he let himself sag against Daniel's shoulder. Daniel rose the weight of his son, light but unbearable in his arms. He turned toward the door, his gaze brushing past Vanessa. Her tears glistened her face, painted in the glow of the chandelier, but Daniel saw only artifice, now only the mask. Behind it he glimpsed the blade. He said nothing. Not to her. Not yet. Inside the penthouse, silence pressed like a living thing. Daniel carried Ethan up the sweeping staircase, every step echoing like judgment. In Ethan's room, he laid the boy on his bed, tucked the blanket over his trembling frame. Ethan's eyes closed slowly, the watch still clutched against his chest lips, murmuring half-formed apologies, into the dark. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his large hand trembling as it smoothed his son's hair. He leaned close, his voice low and steady, meant only for that small, broken heart. No more apologies, Ethan. Not tonight. Not ever. I'm here. When Ethan's breathing finally deepened into sleep, Daniel rose. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching, memorizing, branding into his soul the image of a boy who had been asked to carry guilt heavier than his body. Then he turned, descending the staircase with footsteps heavy as stone. On the marble floor of the foyer, the chess set still lay in its velvet box, forgotten where it had fallen. The bouquet of carved kings and queens, his attempt at healing, was now nothing but crushed velvet and splintered in tension. Daniel's eyes lingered on it only for a second. Then he pulled on his coat, pushed open the glass door, and stepped into the night. The air was colder now, the fog thicker, pressing down like a shroud. Daniel didn't feel it. He walked into the dark with fists clenched and eyes burning his heart, echoing with a vow unspoken but inevitable. Nothing in this house would ever be the same again. The city slept, but Daniel Cross did not. He drove through the midnight streets of San Francisco, as if fleeing something invisible, headlights sweeping across faceless buildings, the fog clinging to the road like ghosts. His hands gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened, but no matter how fast he went, he couldn't outrun the image of Ethan curled on the marble steps, whispering, "I'm sorry," as though begging forgiveness from the dead. By the time he returned to the penthouse, the fog had thickened into a curtain. The building loomed above him, gleaming with the kind of wealth that promised security, but Daniel had seen what lay beneath its light. He entered quietly, footsteps hushed against the marble, the silence so heavy it seemed to press against his ears. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps in the master bedroom, perhaps feigning sleep. For the first time, Daniel didn't care. He poured himself a glass of scotch and sat in the darkened living room staring at the skyline. He had lived his life building empires, dismantling rivals, facing threats with strategy and calculation. But nothing had prepared him for this betrayal, not from across a boardroom table, but inside his own home. He thought of Caroline's smile, the way she had cradled Ethan, her gentle whisper. "He's the last light we have." And then he thought of her voice, silenced in that crash of unanswered calls, blinking on his phone that night. He had buried his grief under work, under money, under Vanessa's carefully woven comfort. But now the earth above it had cracked wide open, and the grief was rising like floodwater. The next morning the penthouse wore its usual mask. Vanessa appeared in the kitchen, hair brushed smooth, wearing a silk robe the color of cream. She poured orange juice with a smile so flawless it could have been painted. "You came home late," she said lightly. "I worried." Daniel didn't answer. He only watched as she carried a tray upstairs toward Ethan's room. He followed silent as a shadow, until he saw her through the half-open door. She bent over Ethan, her voice dripping sweetness. "Here, darling, drink this. It will make you strong. Your father will be so proud." Ethan's hands trembled as he reached for the glass, his eyes darting toward the maid standing nearby. The moment the door closed and the maid's footsteps faded, Vanessa's face hardened, her voice dropping like a blade. Swallow it. Stop pretending to be pitiful. I won't waste my time coddling you." Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to burst in to tear the glass from her hand, to shout the truth into her face. But something in him, an instinct sharpened by years in business, stopped him. Rage could destroy in a moment, but evidence, patience, timing, those could bring her down forever. So he turned and walked away, his chest burning. That afternoon, Daniel called an old friend, a lawyer named David Clark, who had steered him through corporate wars. They met in a quiet corner of a cafe in the Mission District. David listened as Daniel spoke, every word jagged. He didn't interrupt, only watched with those calm, sharp eyes that missed nothing. When Daniel finally fell silent, David tapped his pen against the table. "You can't fight her with emotion," he said. "She'll twist it. She'll make you look unstable. You need proof, hard, irrefutable proof. And if there's money involved, we'll find it." Daniel nodded, though his jaw clenched. "If she's hurting my son, then we make it impossible for anyone to deny." That night, Daniel hired a private investigator. Her name was Claire Yu, a former police detective who now specialized in corporate fraud and domestic cases no one else dared to touch. She was lean, quick, with hair cropped short and a stare that cut through lies. When Daniel explained, her expression didn't change, but her voice carried quiet steel. "You'll get your proof, but you have to be ready for what it shows." Meanwhile, Ethan's world shrank to whispers and shadows. He sat in his room for hours, clutching Caroline's pocket watch, the ticking loud in the silence. At night he played chess alone, moving pieces back and forth across the board, each move a language only he understood. Sometimes he whispered to the empty air, as if his mother were leaning close. "I'm sorry. I'll be stronger. I'll make Dad proud." But the apologies bled into his sleep. He woke with stomach pains, with nightmares of glass shattering and voices telling him he was cursed. Daniel found him one morning curled on the rug, sweat streaking his forehead. That was when he made another call to Dr. Rachel Monroe, a child psychologist known for her work with trauma. Rachel's office was warm, lined with books and soft colors. When Daniel wheeled Ethan inside, the boy clutched his watch so tightly his small fingers turned white. Rachel knelt to his level, her eyes kind, her voice steady. "Ethan, you don't have to talk if you don't want to. You can just sit. You can just hold your watch." Ethan said nothing, but his lips trembled. He sat in silence for minutes, then hours. Finally, his voice broke through barely above a whisper. "I killed her." Daniel's heart stopped. "If I hadn't begged to go to the park," Ethan whispered, tears spilling, "Mom would still be alive. She wouldn't have been driving. She wouldn't." His words dissolved into sobs. Daniel dropped into the chair beside him, covering his face with his hands. He had known his son carried guilt, but to hear it spoken was like being cut open. Rachel's hand rested gently on Ethan's shoulder. Her voice was firm, unwavering. "No, Ethan. What happened was not your fault. Your mother loved you. She protected you. That love didn't end with the accident. It's still here. Right here." She touched her own chest, then pointed to Daniel. "And here." Ethan lifted his tear-streaked face to his father. His gray eyes shimmered with pain. "Do you believe me?" Daniel's throat burned. He knelt beside the wheelchair, gripping Ethan's trembling hand. His voice cracked. "I believe you. You were never to blame." "Never." Ethan collapsed into him, sobbing harder, releasing a weight he had carried alone for years. Daniel wrapped his arms around his son, holding him as though he could hold the world steady. Rachel watched her own eyes glistening. Later, when Ethan slept in the waiting room, she turned to Daniel. "The real damage isn't his leg. It's his trust. If the abuse continues, the wound will deepen beyond repair. You have to protect him. Daniel nodded, his jaw hardening. I will. Days blurred into a dangerous rhythm. Vanessa played the devoted wife in front of outsiders, spooning soup to Ethan, with a smile arranging charity galas, attending board meetings in flawless designer dresses. But behind closed doors, the mask slipped. Claire's discreet cameras captured her with Adrian-whispered plans, forged documents, laughter, as they spoke of transferring shares. In one recording, Vanessa's voice was cold as ice. The boy is nothing but dead weight. Once he's in a special institution, Daniel will be pliable. Then the company is ours. When Claire showed Daniel the footage, his stomach churned with both fury and relief. Proof. Finally, proof. Yet the battle was far from over. Vanessa was careful, Adrian cunning. Daniel knew that one wrong move could make him look paranoid, unstable, a man blinded by grief and guilt. He had to play the long game. Just like chess. He thought of the set, still lying unopened in his study, the gift meant for Ethan. A symbol of strategy, of patience, of the way pawns could become queens. But even as he planned, doubt gnawed at him. One night his phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. Open the silver phone. The truth is inside. Daniel froze. The silver phone. Caroline's. He had kept it locked in a drawer for years, unable to touch it, unable to face what it might hold. His hand shook as he reached for it. The metal was cold, the surface scratched, but when he pressed the button, the screen flickered to life. A folder appeared. A single video file marked with the date of the accident. His chest constricted. His breath caught. He tapped it. Caroline's face filled the screen. Pale, weary, but still carrying that gentle smile. Her voice wavered, but her eyes held steady love. Daniel, if something happens to me, please. Take care of Ethan. Don't let him think it was his fault. He's the last light we have. Daniel's knees buckled. Tears streamed down his face. He pressed his forehead against the phone, sobs ripping from him after years of silence. But the video wasn't over. At the end came chaos, the blare of horns, Caroline's panicked voice breaking through static. Daniel, can you hear me? Please, Ethan. Then silence. The screen went black. Daniel stared at the missed calls that followed, a flood of them all from Caroline that night. And he remembered the network error that kept flashing. He had cursed the carrier, assumed it was a glitch. But now it looked like sabotage. Someone had blocked her final calls. Someone inside his life. He rose to his feet, hands trembling, fury surging hotter than ever. If it wasn't his fault, if Caroline's last moments had been stolen from him, then someone had orchestrated it. And in his gut, he knew who. Vanessa. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He stood at the window watching the fog curl over the Bay Bridge, the city lights flickering through mist. His reflection stared back at him, hollow-eyed, broken, but burning now with resolve. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a clarity sharper than fear. The game had begun. The Cross Tower boardroom was a cathedral of glass and steel, 30 floors above Market Street, with floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the winter sun and reflected it across the polished table like a spotlight. It was here in this room where empires were bought and broken that Daniel Cross decided to stage his trap. He sat at the head of the table, his posture carved from stone, the bait folder resting before him. Inside it were documents designed to look like transfer papers, false contracts seeded by his lawyer David and sanctioned by federal investigators. Every word, every signature line, every page had been prepared with precision. Today would not just be a meeting. It would be a battlefield disguised as business. Across from him sat Vanessa. She wore navy blue silk that shimmered like water diamonds at her ears, her lips painted the shade of blood. To any outsider, she looked like the perfect wife, composed, radiant, the very image of loyalty. But Daniel could see the glint in her eyes, the blade hidden in the velvet. Beside her lounged Adrian, her cousin, a tailored suit, hugging his frame, his smirk half concealed as he tapped a pen idly against the table. His ambition hung in the air like static. Shareholders filed in, murmuring, shaking hands. The room buzzed with anticipation. Whispers of restructuring had rippled through the company for weeks. This was the meeting everyone believed would secure the Cross Empire's next chapter. Vanessa leaned close to Daniel, her perfume subtle and intoxicating, her voice a whisper laced with poison. "This is the right move, darling, for Ethan. For us." Daniel didn't answer. His jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of Caroline's silver phone in his pocket, as if her voice were pressed against his chest, even now. Don't let him think it was his fault. He looked past Vanessa across the table at the documents waiting. Pawns, queens, kings, a game in progress. The meeting began. David Clark, seated quietly at the far end of the room, appeared nothing more than a legal observer. But every movement of his eyes recorded, every pen stroke noted. Behind the scenes, federal agents were already in position, waiting for his signal. Adrian cleared his throat and leaned forward, his voice smooth as oil. "Gentlemen, ladies, we're here today to finalize an agreement that secures this company's growth for decades. Consolidation of shares, streamlined leadership, financial efficiency. Daniel has agreed, at least privately, that it is time." Gasps and nods circled the table. A few murmurs of dissent quickly hushed. Vanessa placed a hand on Daniel's arm, smiling at the shareholders as if she were guiding her husband toward his destiny. Daniel said nothing. He opened the bait folder with deliberate slowness, flipping through the pages. He could feel the eyes of every person in the room locked on him. He read aloud, voice calm, each clause falling like stones into a river. Transfer of voting power, reallocation of equity, chair succession. His tone carried no emotion, no clue of the storm beneath. He pushed the folder toward Adrian. "Review it." Adrian's smirk widened. He scanned the pages quickly, too quickly, his greed blinding him to the snare. "Perfect," he muttered almost under his breath. He picked up the pen, the nib poised just above Daniel's forged signature line. The room seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's gaze shifted to Vanessa. She met his eyes steadily, her smile unwavering, but for a fraction of a second, her pupils dilated triumph, raw and unguarded. She believed she had won. Then the door burst open. The sharp crack of footsteps on marble, the rustle of uniforms, the commanding voice, Federal Bureau of Investigation. "This meeting is suspended under federal warrant." Gasps erupted around the table. Agents flooded in black jackets, stark against the glass walls, badges flashing under the fluorescent light. Sheriff Robert Hayes led the team, his face stern, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We have a warrant to search and seize all documents, digital and physical, related to fraudulent transfer of assets within Cross Industries." Adrian's pen froze mid-stroke, his face drained of color. Vanessa shot to her feet, her chair screeching back, her hand flying to her throat. "What is this?" she cried, her voice pitched high, trembling with rehearsed disbelief. "Daniel, what's happening? Why are they here?" David stood calm as ever, handing the sheriff a sealed packet. "Your Honor, this is corroborating evidence. Forged signatures, surveillance photos, witness statements. It confirms a conspiracy to defraud the company and emotionally abuse a minor." The words dropped like bombs. Shareholders' whispered eyes darting between Daniel and Vanessa, between the agents bagging the documents and Adrian's pale face. Vanessa's mask cracked. For a split second, the sweetness drained, leaving only raw fury. But she recovered quickly, pressing her hands to her cheeks, tears spilling on command. "This is madness, Daniel. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them you don't believe this." She lunged toward him, her voice breaking into sobs. "I only ever wanted to protect Ethan. To make him strong." Daniel remained still, his hands pressed against the table. His eyes burned, but his voice was steady, colder than she had ever heard. "I saw you." Vanessa froze. "I heard you," he continued, "and now the world will see what you are." Her tears faltered, her breath hitched. For the first time, she seemed at a loss for words. 2 agents pulled Adrian's briefcase from the floor, snapping it open. Inside lay another contract, one already signed with Daniel's forged name, the ink fresh. Cameras clicked, evidence sealed. Adrian's shoulders slumped. His smirk was gone, his face now twisted with panic. Sheriff Hayes gave a nod. "Take them." Cold steel cuffs snapped around Adrian's wrists. He cursed, struggling, but the agents dragged him back. Vanessa thrashed, screaming, her hair falling loose, her lipstick smeared. "Daniel, you will pay for this. Do you hear me? You'll lose everything, even that crippled boy." The room froze. The venom in her words cut sharper than any blade. Shareholders recoiled, gasps echoing against glass. The image of the perfect wife shattered completely, replaced by something feral and unmasked. Daniel rose slowly, his fists trembling at his sides, but his voice carried strange calm. "No, Vanessa. You trapped yourself." The agents pulled her away, her screams echoing down the corridor until the boardroom was left in stunned silence. The shareholders looked at Daniel, some with pity, others with awe. The empire they had thought vulnerable now seemed steadied, not by corporate maneuvers, but by something more human, by a father's resolve. When the last agent left, David approached, setting a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "It's done. Step 1. Daniel exhaled, his chest heaving. He turned his eyes to the empty chair beside him, the one where Vanessa had sat, and for the first time in years, he felt a strange kind of quiet. Not peace, not yet, but the quiet that comes when masks fall and truth stands bare. That night, the city roared with headlines. Millionaire's wife arrested in fraud scandal. Conspiracy at Cross Industries. Talk shows dissected the footage leaked from the raid. Clips of Vanessa shrieking, Adrian handcuffed, Daniel silent and steady. It was everywhere. The internet exploded with outrage, sympathy, speculation. But Daniel didn't watch. He drove home, the fog thick again, headlights cutting narrow paths through the dark. Ethan was waiting, curled in his wheelchair by the window, the pocket watch in his hand, his face pale but expectant. Daniel knelt before him, lowering himself until their eyes met. "It's over," he whispered. Ethan's lips trembled. "She's gone." Daniel nodded. "She can't hurt you again?" The boy's shoulders sagged. A tear slipped down his cheek, but his voice was steadier than Daniel expected. "Does that mean we're safe?" Daniel's throat tightened. He pulled his son into his arms, holding him against his chest, the weight of Caroline's promise heavy in his heart. "Not yet," he murmured. But soon. Because Daniel knew this was only the midpoint. The mask was gone. Yes, but the war wasn't finished. Vanessa still had lawyers, Adrian still had connections, and the courtroom still waited. The false victory had been won, but the real battle, the one that would determine Ethan's future, their healing, their survival, was still ahead. He tightened his embrace, feeling Ethan's small heartbeat against his chest, and whispered into the boy's hair, "I will never let you carry this alone again." And in that moment, the father who had once buried himself in boardrooms and balance sheets became something else entirely. Not just a millionaire, not just a strategist, but a man ready to burn his world to the ground if it meant saving his son. The San Francisco Superior Courthouse rose like a slab of gray stone against a winter sky, its columns etched with the weight of justice. News vans lined the street, cameras pointed at the steps, reporters bracing against the cold wind. Inside, the air was taut, charged with anticipation. This was no longer just about a company or a marriage. It was about a child, about truth, about whether love could survive the poison of lies. Daniel Cross sat at the plaintiff's table, his broad shoulders rigid in a navy suit. Beside him, attorney David Clark sifted through files with calm precision. On Daniel's other side sat Ethan, small in his wheelchair, his pocket watch dangling from his trembling fingers. The boy's gray eyes scanned the towering walls, the high windows, the judge's bench looming above. For a moment he looked impossibly small, like a pawn on a chessboard too vast to ever escape. But Daniel leaned close, his voice a steady murmur. "I'm right here. You don't have to be afraid." Across the aisle, Vanessa sat in her tailored dress, her hair perfectly coiffed, a diamond glinting at her throat. Her attorney, Charles Bennett, whispered furiously in her ear, but she only nodded, her face painted with sorrow. She looked fragile, misunderstood a mask she had worn so long it almost seemed real again. Behind her sat Adrian, his suit rumpled, his jaw clenched, his own lawyer, flipping through a briefcase of doomed defenses. The bailiff called, "All rise." Judge Eleanor Brooks entered her black robes, swaying, her expression stern and unreadable. She was known in San Francisco as incorruptible, the kind of judge who bent to no pressure, who carried the weight of children's futures with gravity. The gavel struck. The trial began. David Clark rose first. His voice was firm, deliberate, every word measured. "Your Honor, we are here to present evidence of conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, forgery of legal documents, and most urgently emotional and psychological abuse of a minor, Ethan Cross. At the heart of this case is not just money or power, but a child's safety." He pressed a button. The screen behind him flickered to life. Carolyn Cross appeared. The courtroom stilled. Her face filled the monitor, pale, weary, yet luminous with a mother's love. Her voice trembled through the speakers. "Daniel, if something happens to me, please take care of Ethan. Don't let him think it was his fault. He's the last light we have." Ethan's lips parted. His small hand clutched the pocket watch so tightly that the chain bit into his skin. Tears shimmered in his eyes as he leaned closer to the screen, as if reaching across time to touch his mother again. Daniel placed his arm around his son's shoulders, pulling him close. His eyes burned, but he did not look away. Carolyn's voice had returned, and with it the truth that had been buried beneath grief and lies. The video ended. The silence afterward was crushing. Even the reporters at the back seemed frozen. David spoke again, softer now. This message was recorded on the night of Caroline Cross's fatal accident. Call logs show repeated attempts to reach Daniel. None went through. We now have evidence those calls were deliberately blocked by someone who controlled his work phone at the time, Vanessa Cross. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Bennett shot to his feet. Objection, speculation. But Judge Brooks raised her hand. "You will have your chance, Mr. Bennett. Sit." The next witness was Margaret Alvarez, the elderly neighbor. Her hands shook as she took the stand, but her eyes carried fire. "I saw it," she said, voice steady despite her tremor. "I heard her. Vanessa told the boy he killed his mother. She called him useless. I wanted to speak sooner, but I was afraid. I can't stay silent anymore." Bennett rose for cross-examination, his tone sharp. "Mrs., Alvarez, isn't it true you've had disputes with my client about property boundaries? Margaret lifted her chin. A hedge is nothing compared to a child suffering. The words rang through the chamber, silencing every whisper. Then came Dr. Rachel Monroe. She unfolded her notes, but her voice carried more weight than any paper. Ethan exhibits clear signs of prolonged emotional abuse. Nightmares, stomach pain, withdrawal, panic attacks when he hears adult footsteps. These are textbook consequences of constant humiliation. His disability is not the source of his pain. The repeated verbal assaults are, Bennett pressed. Doctor, do you have direct proof these words came from my client? Rachel's gaze didn't flinch. I have the child's consistent testimony, the corroboration of a neighbor, and clinical reactions that match every description. But more than that. She paused, then gestured toward Ethan, who sat clutching his watch. You can see it in his eyes. The jury did look, and they saw a boy who seemed both fragile and unbearably strong, a boy who had carried too much for too long. Finally, Claire Yu, the private investigator, took the stand. She presented photographs, recordings, timelines. Adrian and Vanessa in hushed corners, signing drafts of fraudulent contracts, planning Ethan's removal to a special institution. The camera lens didn't lie. Each frame was a nail in their coffin. When the last photo appeared on the screen, Vanessa's hand on Adrian's shoulder, her smile glinting with triumph, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Brooks banged her gavel. Order. Vanessa rose suddenly, tears spilling down her cheeks, her voice breaking into a wail. I only wanted the best for him. You don't understand. Ethan needs to be stronger. I did everything for his good. David didn't raise his voice. No, Mrs. Cross. You did everything for yourself. Once the boy was gone, the company was yours. Her sobs faltered, her mask slipping. For a moment her eyes flashed with naked rage, and the performance shattered. Then the unthinkable happened. Judge Brooks called Ethan to the stand. Daniel stiffened, his heart hammered. He wanted to rise to shield his son, to say no. But Ethan looked up at him, eyes wide but steady, and whispered, I want to. The bailiff wheeled him forward. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Ethan's small hand trembled as he held the pocket watch, the chain glinting under the lights. His voice, when it came, was soft but clear. She told me I killed my mom. She said I was a curse. I believed her. Every night I thought, maybe she was right. But my mom... His voice cracked. My mom told me not to be afraid anymore. And my dad believes me now. Daniel's throat closed. He pressed his hand to his mouth, tears streaming freely, unashamed before the world. The courtroom was silent, but for the sound of a boy's truth breaking chains. When Ethan finished, the judge leaned forward, her expression grave but softened. Thank you, Ethan. You are very brave. The boy wheeled back Daniel, kneeling beside him the moment he returned. He pulled his son into his arms, pressing his forehead against Ethan's, whispering through his tears. You were never at fault. You are my light. The gavel struck once more. Judge Brooks's voice cut through the silence. The evidence is overwhelming. The court grants temporary sole custody of Ethan Cross to his father, Daniel Cross, effective immediately. A restraining order is issued against Vanessa Cross. All fraudulent contracts are null and void pending criminal trial. This hearing is adjourned. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder. Vanessa collapsed into her chair, her tears gone, her face a mask of fury. Adrian cursed under his breath as deputies moved in. Handcuffs clinked, chains locked, and for the first time the predators looked small. Daniel turned to his son, lifting him into his arms, the pocket watch pressed between them. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. but he heard none of it. All he heard was Ethan's whisper so faint only he could catch it. "Dad, I feel safe." And for the first time in years, Daniel believed it. Outside, the winter sun broke through the fog, spilling gold across the courthouse steps. Father and son emerged together, the crowd parting, as if the city itself recognized something sacred had survived. Daniel carried Ethan down the steps, not as a burden, but as a vow, his arms strong, his resolve unshakable. This was not just survival. This was rebirth. The city seemed to exhale the morning after the verdict. Headlines blared across every paper, every screen: "Cruelty unmasked, millionaire's wife, convicted of fraud and child abuse." Photographs of Vanessa in handcuffs filled the news cycle, her mask of elegance shattered. Adrian's name followed, tied to conspiracy and forgery. Reporters dissected every detail, analysts debated motives, and social media erupted with outrage. Parents across the country wrote about their children, about fear, about resilience. But inside the Cross penthouse, the world was quiet. Daniel had closed the curtains against the cameras. He didn't want Ethan to see the spectacle, the endless replay of pain. Instead, he brewed coffee in the kitchen, the rich aroma filling the space, and made pancakes the way Caroline once had, small, imperfect circles that stuck slightly to the pan. He hadn't cooked in years, but this morning felt different. This morning wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. Ethan rolled into the kitchen still in pajamas, his hair sticking up in tufts. The pocket watch hung around his neck, the chain glinting in the soft light. He paused at the sight of his father in an apron flipping a pancake with clumsy determination. Dad Ethan's voice was small, but tinged with something new: curiosity. Daniel looked up, spatula in hand. "Don't laugh. Your mom used to do this better." Ethan's lips curved into the faintest smile. It was fragile, but it was real. They ate together at the marble counter, the city sprawling in fog beyond the glass walls. For the first time in years, silence between them didn't feel heavy. It felt safe. Later that day, Daniel drove Ethan across the Golden Gate Bridge, the steel arch rising like a promise against the sky. The fog peeled back, revealing sunlight glinting on the bay. Ethan stared out the window, his eyes wide. "Mom used to bring me here," he whispered. Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. She loved this view. Said it made her feel like the world was bigger than our pain. They drove north, past rolling hills, until they reached the small cemetery where Caroline rested. The air was still, the trees bare, the ground dotted with winter flowers. Daniel pushed Ethan's wheelchair along the gravel path until they stopped before the headstone. Ethan's hands trembled as he set the pocket watch against the stone. His voice cracked. "Mom, I tried. I thought it was my fault, but Dad says it wasn't. And I believe him now." Daniel knelt beside him, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder. His voice was low, steady. "She hears you. She's proud of you. She always was." For a long time they stayed there in silence, the breeze carrying the scent of earth and pine. It wasn't the silence of grief anymore. It was the silence of something released. A week later, the penthouse was transformed. Not with wealth, not with grandeur, but with warmth. Balloons bobbed against the ceiling. A cake sat on the dining table, frosted with uneven blue icing. Streamers crisscrossed the walls. It was Ethan's belated birthday party, his first celebration in years. Lily Parker, his classmate, arrived first, her energy filling the room. She handed Ethan a glittery box and grinned. "I saved the best spot for you." She slipped a bracelet over his wrist, stretchy beads spelling out the word brave. Ethan stared at it, his lips curving upward. For once, he didn't shrink back from the attention. Margaret Alvarez came carrying her famous apple pie. Dr. Rachel Monroe stopped by, briefly reminding them of therapy sessions. Even Claire Yu appeared at the doorway, offering a rare smile before slipping away, leaving behind a small gift bag with Ethan's name on it. When the candles were lit, everyone gathered around the cake. Lily nudged Ethan, whispering, "Make a wish." Ethan hesitated, staring at the flames flickering like tiny stars. Then he closed his eyes. His small chest rose and fell, and he whispered words too soft for anyone to hear. When he opened his eyes, he blew, and the candles went out in a single breath. Cheers erupted. Ethan laughed a sound so pure, so unexpected it startled even him. Daniel felt tears sting his eyes, but this time they weren't born of pain. They were born of gratitude. After the party, when the guests had gone, Daniel and Ethan sat together in the quiet living room. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, the Bay Bridge glowing like a spine of gold. Ethan leaned against his father's arm, the bracelet gleaming on his wrist. Dad Ethan's voice was soft. "Yes, I want to try standing." Daniel's breath caught. He turned, searching his son's face. Ethan's eyes were clear, steady. "All right," Daniel whispered. "I'll be right here." He moved the wheelchair aside and knelt beside his son. Ethan gripped his father's arm, his legs trembling as he pushed against the floor. Daniel's hand steadied his back, his other hand firm at his elbow. Slowly, shakily, Ethan rose. His knees quivered, his face flushed, but he stood. For a heartbeat for two, he stood on his own legs. "I did it." Ethan gasped, pride shining through his tears. Daniel's vision blurred. He pulled his son into his arms, holding him tight. "Yes, you did. And tomorrow we'll do it again." That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Daniel stood at the window, looking out at the city. The fog had thinned the stars, faint but visible. He thought of Caroline, of her voice on the phone, of her final words. "Don't let him think it was his fault." "I kept my promise," Daniel whispered into the night. He's free now. The weeks that followed were not without challenge. Therapy sessions were hard. The shadows of trauma didn't vanish overnight. But Ethan grew stronger, his laughter more frequent, his nightmares less suffocating. He returned to school slowly, carefully, with Lily by his side. He learned to raise his hand in class, to play chess at recess, to share pieces of himself again. Daniel changed too. He no longer drowned himself in boardrooms. He attended therapy with Ethan. He cooked clumsy breakfasts. He walked with his son along the Embarcadero, pushing the wheelchair beside him. He became not just a father, but a companion, a guardian, a witness to every small victory. And slowly their home became what Caroline had always wanted it to be, a place of light. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, months later, Daniel and Ethan returned to the Golden Gate Bridge. They stood at a lookout point, the wind tugging at their coats, the bay sprawling endlessly below. Ethan leaned on his crutch, now his wheelchair folded in the trunk. He looked out at the water, his face calm. "Dad?" he asked. "Yes. Do you think Mom can see us?" Daniel swallowed hard. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I don't think." "I know." Ethan nodded a small smile, curving his lips. He lifted his wrist, the bracelet catching the light. "Brave." Then he turned back to the view, the sun spilling gold across the water. For the first time, the future didn't look frightening. It looked vast. It looked open, and as father and son stood together against the wind, their shadows stretching long across the stone, it was clear that the story was no longer one of survival. It was a story of rising, of standing, of reclaiming the light that cruelty had tried to steal. the storm was over. The path ahead was theirs, was. When we look back on the journey of Daniel and Ethan Cross, what stays with us is not only the drama of courtrooms or the spectacle of betrayal, but the quieter truth that sits beneath it all. No child should ever be asked to carry the weight of guilt that does not belong to them. Ethan's trembling voice whispering, "I'm sorry," into the darkness speaks to countless children who grow up believing they are to blame for tragedies beyond their control. And Daniel's awakening his choice to stop burying himself in boardrooms and finally stand as the father his son needed reminds us that healing is not passive. It is an act of courage, of standing in the fire and choosing love over silence. This story shows us that cruelty can wear a polished mask, but it cannot remain hidden forever. Lies fracture, truth endures, and even the smallest flicker of love, a father's embrace, a child's first attempt to stand, has the power to push back the deepest shadow. The lesson here is simple, yet profound. Our words matter. They can either bind someone in shame or set them free. Vanessa's words nearly destroyed Ethan, branding him with guilt that ate at his spirit. But Caroline's final words carried through time, and Daniel's steady insistence, "You are not to blame," became lifelines. Each of us has that same power in our daily lives. We can be the ones who tear down with cruelty, or we can be the ones who lift up with kindness. And sometimes what saves someone is not grand gestures, but a steady voice saying, "I believe in you. You are enough." I'd like to invite you to pause and reflect. If you were, Daniel, would you have had the courage to face the truth about someone who shared your home, to expose betrayal even when it threatened to break your world apart? If you were Ethan, could you still believe that love might find you again after being told you were worthless? And more personally, what about in your own life? Have there been moments when words wounded you deeply, or moments when someone's kindness pulled you back from despair? Sharing those reflections doesn't just honor your own story. It becomes a thread in the fabric of healing for others who may be walking a similar path. So I ask you, what part of this story touched you most? Do you believe, as Daniel came to believe, that justice may come late, but it never fails to arrive? And do you believe, as Ethan proved, that even the smallest steps, literally trembling steps, are victories worth celebrating? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your words may be the encouragement someone else desperately needs tonight. Finally, thank you. Thank you for walking through this story with us, through its darkest nights and into its fragile dawn. Thank you for lending your heart to Ethan's pain and your hope to his triumph. Every time you listen, reflect, and respond, you become part of something larger, a small community bound by the belief that love can outlast cruelty, that healing can rise from despair, and that no one is ever truly alone. From the bottom of my heart, I'm grateful you're here.